Welcome to the Grail of Truth Bible Study. In this Bible study, we are going to be doing the Bible chapter by chapter all the way through. And if you want to participate in this Bible study, you can go ahead and like, subscribe, and leave a comment below, and we'll let you know when the Bible study takes place. But be sure to check out each video as you go through, and let us know if you have any comments or questions, and we'll be more than happy to answer them. You can also check out our blog at grailoftruth.com, or check out our channel on YouTube for more great videos, including more chapters of these Bible studies. And so we're going to be using the English Standard Version of the Bible. And we'll be starting out with Genesis chapter 1 in this video, and without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light that was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made an expanse, and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. And God brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and seeds bearing fruit, in which is their seed according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. Let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser night to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the great sea creatures, and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Now, Genesis chapter 1 obviously talks about the creation of the world, the heavens and the earth, but it's not the only chapter in the Bible that talks about creation. There are other chapters that give us a little bit more light of information about the creation process that occurred in the beginning. One of those is Proverbs chapter 8, and so I'm going to read some interesting verses in Proverbs chapter 8 that will help give us more light on what's going on in Genesis chapter 1. So I'll pick it up in verse 22. Now, it's important to give a little bit of background about what's going on in this chapter in Proverbs. Basically, this is being spoken by wisdom, or rather the spirit of wisdom, which is a spirit of God. And essentially, the spirit of wisdom is being personified here as a faithful wife or a faithful woman. And so wisdom is speaking here, and she's speaking about the creative process that occurred in the very beginning, even before God began to create the heavens and the earth. And so we pick it up in verse 22. It says, "The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up, at the first before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth, when there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth, before he made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle," and I want you to note this word here, "when he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned the seas its limit so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was beside him like a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the children of man." Okay. So I want you to note this part about the circle part, and about setting a limit for the sea. Okay, so we're going to look at another verse in Job that talks about creation as well. So in the book of Job, in chapter 38, Job is talking to God, or God rather is talking to Job, and God says the following, picking up in verse 4. He says, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determines its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched a line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Or who shut in the sea with doors when they burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment, and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, Thus far shall you come, and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stayed. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth, and the wicked will be shaken out of it? It is changed like clay under the seal, and its features stand out like a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and their uplifted arm is broken. Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light, and where is the place of darkness? That you may take it to its territory, and that you may discern the paths to its home. You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. Have you entered into the storehouses of snow? Have you seen the storehouses of hail? And so it continues to go on about different elements of the whole creation process. So I wanted to kind of read those passages to get a little more flavor to what's going on in Genesis chapter 1. But a couple of things we can see is that, first of all, when God began to create the heavens and the earth, wisdom was a big part of this process, the spirit of wisdom. But also you notice he talks about things like stretching out a line upon it, creating measurement, creating boundaries for the seas, setting bars and doors. He compares darkness to being like being death or a place of evil, and that the evil in darkness like to hide, and they run away from the light and things like that. And particularly that a verse in Proverbs where it talks about him stretching out a line upon it and drawing a circle upon the deep. So drawing a circle upon the deep is something you do with a compass. And actually in the King James Version, it says that he places his compass upon the deep. And I don't mean a compass like north, south, east, west. I mean a compass like an architect would use, where it basically draws a circle with a pencil. Okay, so that type of compass is what I'm talking about. So apparently the dark deep that we're talking about in Genesis chapter 1, God placed a compass upon this deep. As we read in these verses, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. So here's the deep upon which God is placing his compass. And it would seem that he's setting certain boundaries in drawing out lines and measurements and so forth, and giving a place whereby the waters cannot surpass, these proud dark waters that in which evil itself hides. Okay. And it says the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And as we read in Proverbs chapter 8, the Spirit of God is personified as the Spirit of wisdom, and it says that she dances before him, and her delight is in the habitable parts of the world, of the earth. So these would be the parts where God is creating things. It's not the part of nothingness, not the empty part, not the dark void, but rather the parts where man and human and creation comes into existence and can actually manifest into being, and that the Spirit of God delights in those things, which would suggest that the Spirit of God doesn't delight in the darkness, which is where the evil hides. So what we see here in the beginning is that where evil is present, God does not delight in that evil. And in fact, that is the definition of evil, that it's that which God does not delight in. And so the darkness, the void, by definition, this empty dark void, is non-existence. It's an empty, non-existent space, and God is creating things that he causes to manifest in this empty, non-existent space. And so all that's evil, all the things that are not good, that God does not delight in, hides within this empty, non-existent space. And it's not God's will that evil should come into existence. He would prefer that evil stay in a state of non-existence. And for a better understanding on this, I would suggest you go look at my other video that talks about the problem of evil, and we explore this concept of how evil was created and how it entered into our world, and why God hates it, and why it was not God's intent for evil to rule or reign or on this planet. And so God originally created darkness, a state of non-existence, and he wanted evil to stay there and to not exist in this void. He never wanted evil to come into existence. But man sinned, and man let evil enter into the world. Because God is a loving God, but he also gave man free will and free choice. And so man used that free choice, unfortunately, wrongly, but God had mercy on man, and through the gift of his Son, Jesus Christ, he's able to redeem us even though we've sinned and let evil into the world. So, but that part, again, you can check out my other video, which talks about the problem of evil, that explores those concepts further. So the point here is that there's a darkness, empty void upon which God is placing a circle, and he's setting off a boundary. And you'll notice in the Bible that whenever a circle is talked about, that's usually a complete separation of one thing from another thing. So he uses it in the example of the angel later on. You'll find out in the Garden of Eden that has the flaming sword that turns all different directions at the same time in order to prevent Adam and Eve from re-entering the garden after they fell from God's grace. And so another example would be the rainbow covenant, which separates the world before the flood from the world after the flood, in the circular aspect of the rainbow. Or the covenant of circumcision would suggest that the offspring of Abraham would be a special chosen people set apart from all other races. And so the fruit of his loins, if you will, would be a separate people from all other peoples on the planet. And so circumcision is a covenant that represents that. So there's many examples where you can see where a circle represents a total cutting or separation from one thing and separating it completely from another thing. Okay, so God placing his circle upon the deep completely separates the darkness of the empty void of the waters from those things that actually exist. Now, what's interesting about this is if you look at the mathematics of working with a compass and a circle, you come up with certain patterns that are very, very interesting. So what I have on the screen here is something called the flower of life, which is the black circular pattern behind the lettering here. And so if you take a compass and you spin it on a circle, so it creates a circle on a piece of paper, okay? Then you take the point of the compass, and if you're going to place the point of the compass anywhere along the perimeter of the circle that you just made, okay, and then you spin a second circle, okay, so let's say this is our first circle here, okay, and then we spin a second circle. We start here and we create a second circle here. What happens is anywhere the two circles intersect creates a new point on whereby you can place the compass to start another circle. So you repeat the process, you create another circle, and it creates two more intersecting points, and it can go on from there, and you can continue to create circle after circle. Eventually what happens is you'll run out of places where you can put the compass. You come up with this complete pattern where all the circles form this what's called the flower of life in sacred geometry. And so this pattern that I'm showing you is not something that someone designed or they thought was cool or they drew up. It's something that the mathematics of the universe itself draws simply by obeying the rules of those mathematics. Simply by obeying the geometry of how circles work and how compasses work, this is the pattern that results when you experiment with a compass. Okay, so God placed a circle upon the face of the deep. What I want you to notice is that once you've created 7 total circles, this pattern is in a state of completeness. Okay, it's finished. And God created the heavens and the earth in 7 days. 6 days he created each element of creation, and then on the 7th day he rested because it was the day of completion where he stopped from his works. And so that's echoed in this flower of life, because what we see here, let's take for example this first circle here. This first circle here, if we consider this to be analogous of day 1, on day 1 God creates light, okay? And then the second day, this is the second circle here, God creates the sky, which separates the waters that are above from the waters that are below. Okay. On the third day here, God creates earth and the plants. And then on the 4th day, God creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. On the 5th day, God creates the fishes and the birds. And then on the 6th day, God creates the animals and man. And then the 7th day is the day of rest, which completes the whole process. And then the 8th day is the day in which, traditionally in Judaism, which you would perform a circumcision, which means that's the day that is basically things are cut off. It's a day of new beginnings. It's cutting off from the old and starting the new, basically. So this day of completion is all echoed within the flower of life in sacred geometry. Now, here's what's really, really interesting. In the flower of life, each of these items is a composite, a opposite of the other. So, for example, day 1 is the creation of light, but on day 4, you create the sun, the moon, and the stars, which fill up and rule over the realm of light. So it's completely opposite on the flower of life here. On day 2, the sky and the waters are created, the waters which are above and the waters are below. But on the opposite side of the spectrum are the fishes and the birds, which fill up the sky and the waters below. Okay, and then on day 3, you have the creation of animals and man, and animals, man, fill up and rule, in the case of man, rule and subdue the earth. Okay, so each item, a day of creation, is an opposite on God's spectrum, and then you have a day of rest. So my point is that there is very interesting, very complex geometry and incredible information embedded within the text that shows that the text is more than just some ancient shepherd's myth or ancient Bedouin myth. It is in fact something that has the thumbprint and the finger of God upon it, and it shows a divine attribute embedded within the text. So I find this very, very interesting, but this is what we can see when we read into the text on Genesis chapter 1, and it talks about this God placing his compass on the face of the deep in Proverbs, and that's shown within this text, which is just very amazing to me. Now, the same type of six-pointed pattern is shown in things like the Star of David. It's shown in things like snowflakes. It's shown in things like sunbursts. You'd have like 6 points of rays of sun in certain sparkles of sunlight and so forth. So the point is that this geometric pattern is embedded and inwoven upon the very fabric of the universe itself. And so the text in Genesis chapter 1 is reflecting the very nature of God's creation in the universe. The second thing I want to show in the text is that the text also reflects the Trinitarian aspect of God. And you can see this in the very first 3 verses. So if you look in verse 1, you have, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then in verse 2, we have, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And then in verse 3, it says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. So we know from the book of John that the light is Jesus, and we can see that. I'll show you that verse right here. In John 1:1, it very much echoes the same pattern of Genesis 1:1. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. So there we see the light. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So the Messiah, Jesus, is the light, and that light is the life of men. So the light that occurs at the beginning in Genesis chapter 1 is the light of Messiah. And that light is represented in God's Word, and that Word proceeds out of the mouth of God. The Word is God, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word proceeds out of the mouth of God, and it creates the things that the Word commands. So in this case, when God spoke, he spoke his word, and he said, let there be light, then there was light. So the light here that's being talked about, in addition to being the Messiah and Jesus, it's the Word, and it's a form of communication. So light is a realm of the transfer of information. And we see this mirrored in day 4 of Genesis, when God creates the sun, moon, and the stars to rule over the realm of light, because they are there to convey information to the earth, specifically the keeping of time, because the stars and the sun and the moon are God's great cosmic clock, which keeps time in the heavens. And so this is for the purpose of conveying information. So the first information that's put into the universe is God's Word when he says, let there be light. And so before he spoke, there was only darkness. But once he spoke, he put the light of his Word into the universe. So that Word is the Messiah. That Word is Jesus, as we saw in John 1:1. So verse 3 refers to God the Son, who is the Word, who is Jesus. Verse 2, we talked about the Spirit of God, which we saw in Proverbs chapter 8, who danced before the Lord, rejoicing in the habitable parts of the world. That's the Spirit of God. And so we have God the Son and God the Spirit. And then, of course, in verse 1, we have God the Father, the source of all things, because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and from the Father, all things proceed. So here we have God the Father, God the Spirit, God the Son, all in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. There's the Trinity. So continuing on here, we see that God saw the light, that it was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. Now, this shows that God judges his creation. So here's the process that we see taking place here. God the Father speaks. He speaks the Word, and the Word is his Son. And the Word says, let there be light. And there was light. So it's the Word that goes about creating the actual manifestation of God's creation. Jesus, the Word, creates the light. After the light's created, it comes back before the Father so the Father can review it, because it says that God saw the light and that it was good. And then he judges it. It says that God separates the light from the darkness. So not only does he review it, and he determines if it's good or bad, but he also judges it and makes a separation from those things that are good and those things that are bad. And after he judges it, he basically announces or decrees or proclaims his judgment. And he calls the light day, and the darkness he calls night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So God makes a decree, and in addition to that, he gives names to those things. And giving the name to something is taking ownership or authority over it, or representing that you're a authority or a covering, and that thing is subject to you. So in the case of, for example, marriage, a wife leaves her father and her mother, and she takes upon herself the authority and the covering of her husband, and she takes upon his last name. And so that's a transference from one family to the other. So by God calling the darkness night and calling the light day, he's basically taking authority over that, and that those things are subject to him. And that's what happens in the case of judgment. And so the important thing to note about this is that we're all going to go under judgment before God at some point in time, because there's a day of judgment that will come in the future. There's a final judgment day where all things are judged, and God will make decrees based on that judgment, and whatever decree he makes, those things will stand forever. So whether he decrees people to be righteous and to enter into eternity in heaven with him, or whether he decrees people to go into perdition, into the lake of fire, that once that decree is given, the judgment is final. So we are all going to go before God in judgment, and his authority as judge is set up from the very beginning, and you can see this in Genesis chapter 1. Now what we need to understand is that the darkness and the waters and so forth that are being represented in chapter 1, they are separated in day 1. They're separated in day 2, because God creates sky. He creates this expanse, and he separates the waters which are above from the waters that are below. And so this expanse basically extends well above the atmosphere, well above the clouds, all the way into outer space, because it says later on that he sets the sun, the moon, and the stars in the firmament of the heaven. So space and the sky and the atmosphere, this is all part of this great expanse. It's kind of like the creation of space itself. But that's different from the darkness that he created in the beginning, because the waters that he created in the beginning, that dark void, is basically representative of things that are completely non-existent, not known, if you will. And so that's what the waters represent. They represent things that are basically non-existent, not known. So when he's separating the waters which are above from the waters that are below, the abyss is always in the Bible kind of compared to the empty pit, the void, the place of the dead, and so forth. There's many examples of this in the Bible, like in the book of Job and so forth. But when he separates the waters that are above from the waters below, some people take this to mean that there are actually waters above the realm of space that separates the heavenly realm where God is and the angels are from his created universe. Others take it to mean that this is talking about the clouds that are in heaven, and that the waters below are the oceans and the seas and so forth. And so either one of those are possible, but the important thing here is to note that God is someone who creates, and then he can separate or join things together. He's a God that can both bring things together, as in the case of marriage, but he's also things in the creative process that can separate things apart, as we see in these verses in Genesis. So day 2, essentially he separates the waters that are above from the waters that are below, and he creates the sky. And the important thing to note, and when we talked about like the waters and darkness, is that darkness doesn't comprehend or retain information. It's light on which information is transferred. But when you think about the nature of water, you can't really write on water. Water is like self-erasing. If you try to write something, it just kind of like the information is not retained. But if you write something on earth, that information, like a clay tablet, then that information can be retained, because a tablet is able to keep the information that's placed upon it. Water dissipates the information. So in the case of darkness and waters, it's something that can't receive the information of God. It can't comprehend it. The light of God on which information is travels from God into the earth, is not something that can be written upon the waters. And so, for example, when you do repentance, you go through repentance in the waters because it washes away the sins that you've committed in the past. In other words, it's washing away that information, that sinful act that you've done in your life, so that it's remembered and it's recorded no more. So water is used to blot out things. It's not used to have information. It's used to eliminate information, if you will. And so the things that go into the waters or go into the abyss are things that are are forgotten and gone forever. They sink into the pit of the abyss, so to speak. On day 3, it says, and God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered into one place, and let dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together called he seas. He called seas, and he saw that it was good. And he said, let the earth sprout vegetation and plants yielding the fruit-bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind in the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, the trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. Okay, so I'm going to switch over a version here because the English Standard Version doesn't really render this properly. It says, because it says plants yielding seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit according to which is their seed. So let's go take a look at this in the King James Version, just so we can see a cross comparison here. If we go to the King James and we take a look at verse 12, for example, it says, and the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after its kind, and the tree yielding fruit whose seed was in itself. So a better rendition is not plant, but rather herbs. Specifically, we're talking about types of plants where the seeds are on the outside and they scatter, as opposed to fruit, which seeds are on the inside and they're gathered and clustered in the middle of the fruit, and then an animal would eat them and then eat the seeds, and the animal go somewhere else and deposit the seed, and that's one of the way that the fruit would be propagated. So one has seeds on the outside that scatters and travels outward. The other has seeds on the inside. And this is very important because as we move on here, what we see is that when God gives food or dietary laws to man and the animals, he gives the green herbs, or the types of food that have seed on the outside, like wheat and so forth, he gives those to the animals. But the fruit that has the seed on the inside, he gives that to man for food. And the difference is that man has this inward knowledge, this inward dwelling of God, because God breathes his spirit into man, where he can understand God internally, whereas the animals are merely external works type things. They don't have the internal revelation or the internal comprehension of God. So what we're seeing here is a comparison between things that are on the outside and things that are on the inside, things that are external and things that are internal. And so we see this in day 3 of Genesis chapter 1. So let's go back to the ESV version here. And so what we see in day 4 is it says, and God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and for years. Okay, so the signs here we're talking about are like the signs that you would see in the zodiac, for example, or also signs like the Star of Bethlehem or things of that nature. But more specifically, they're talking about the signs that are basically part of God's clock. So there's a difference between astrology and astronomy. Okay, in astronomy, you're basically using the things in the heavens simply as a form of timekeeping, and specifically if God uses them for his purpose to convey a certain point of information in a sign like the Star of Bethlehem. Okay, they're not to be worshipped. It's God's clock. Okay, it's God's timekeeping piece. It's basically for that purpose only. It's not the Creator itself. So to worship the heavenly objects would be akin to if I told you that I was going to meet you at 3 o'clock tomorrow, or I said I would meet you when the small hand on the clock is on the 3 and the big hand's on the 12. If tomorrow, if I show up at that time, you don't start worshiping the clock saying that the clock predicted the future because the clock knew exactly when I would show up. No, it's just a tool for timekeeping. That's all it is. It's the same thing with the stars in the heavens, including the signs of the zodiac. They're not to be used for horoscopes or anything like that. They're simply like the numbers on the hour hand of a clock. Okay, they're just there for the purposes of timekeeping. And so that's the way that they were set up in the beginning. That's the way God meant for them to be used. And unfortunately, that's not the way we use them today. We still determine our 24-hour day by the sun going around the earth. That's what determines the 24 hours. So we still use the sun for days, but we don't use the rest of the things that God created in the way that he created them for timekeeping, because the moon used to determine the months. That's where you get the name moon or months. And we don't do that anymore. We took what was the moon, the lunar cycle for the months, and we put that down on paper, the Romans did, and placed upon the paper, the Roman paper, the Roman calendar rather, their own version of what a month is, and set it in place so it doesn't go by the moon anymore. So they basically got away from what God originally intended in terms of his way of keeping a calendar or keeping time. So the Romans changed the time and the seasons and the days and the years and so forth. The Julian calendar did. And so, addition to that, there are other stars that are used for timekeeping as well. There are 5 planets that are visible to the naked eye, which is Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and Venus. And they all go through the zodiac at different cycles, and they're all there specifically to be used as part of timekeeping on God's clock, basically, in the heavens, is timekeeping that he established in the heavens. And so we don't use these things anymore for that purpose, but that, in my opinion, is wrong. That's not what God originally established. So we should be using God's calendar. And so God's calendar is the Hebrew calendar, which is a lunar solar calendar. That's the calendar type that we should be going by, not the Roman Julian or the modern Gregorian calendar. So just to note that that's what God originally placed in the heavens, that their purpose is for keeping time. Okay, so it says he made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule over the day, that's the sun, the lesser light to rule over the night, that's the moon, and he made the stars also. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth and to rule, and that means to basically, not only to rule, but to, like a ruler, you're establishing measurements, you're establishing measures of time. Okay, so to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness, and God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the 4th day. Okay. On the 5th day, God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly in the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So here you have the creation of sea creatures, and we also see the first instance where God blesses and multiplies them. And so he says, so God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters of the seas, and let the birds multiply in the earth. Now, the terminology here in the Hebrew is the sense of the fish swarm together, they congregate, and the birds fly apart, they flee, they're flyers, okay? And so the birds up above spread out, and the fish underneath gather together. So again, you kind of have this similar juxtaposition that's being talked about with the different types of fruit versus herbs, okay? Things that scatter their seed and things that have the seed gathered on the inside. And so the waters below that have the fish gathering together on the inside, that is analogous of things that are below, that are like subtext, that are beneath the surface. So like when you talk in communication, for example, you talk about things that are subtle or communication that's below the surface. That's analogous to the waters, because the serpent, for example, in the garden was very subtle, and a serpent is an aquatic type, well, it's an amphibian type animal, can come on land too, but it's also an aquatic type animal, and God compares the devil to being such things as Leviathan, which is this sea creature that's full of pride that lives underneath the waters. So that's something to be understood about, is that it's in this internal, below the surface, subtle sub-type thing that's beneath the waters, versus the things that come down from heaven, like the angels in heaven that are from above, that give them like the birds of the heavens. They're comparable to the angels. There's many times that birds are compared to angels in the Bible that bring God's message from above, and they spread out over the whole earth, okay? They speak to everyone over the whole planet. So there's a lot of dualism or type of analogies that are given in this text as we read through this. So the evening and the morning, so God blessed him, said, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the waters of the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning the 5th day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts on the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image and our likeness, and let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." Okay, so there's a distinction between animals and man. Okay, man is not an animal. A man is not a monkey. Evolution is false. One of the reasons we can see evolution is false is because from what we just read, we see the plants were created on day 3, and the sun was created on day 4. Okay, so if for example, if these days are supposed to be like millions of years of time spread apart, the plants never would have been able to live without the sun. Okay, so these are literal 6 days of creation. You have to be 24-hour days because the plants are going to need the sun within 24 hours in order to grow and live. So evolution is false. This is a literal account of what happened. And when God made man, he separated he made 2 different creations, 2 distinctions between beasts or animals and man who was made in his image. Okay, and his likeness. And man was given dominion over the fish of the sea and over the whole planet. So God instilled within man dominion and rulership and over the whole planet. So one thing to note here is that he's giving man authority to basically go out and conquer and subjugate and rule over the whole world, to spread out over the whole planet. What we're going to see is a juxtaposition here when we get into Genesis chapter 2 between man that is more like a hunter-gatherer, more like going out and taking the planet and conquering it, versus the domesticated man that is in the garden that's under the subjugation of God, that's in paradise. And this is a comparison between the external and the internal that we just saw with the cases of the fruit, for example, and the vegetables and the herbs, where you have the seed spreading outward all over the place, and then the seed that's on the inside. So you have domesticated man in the garden, who's concerned about the things that God speaks to in the heart on the inside, versus the man that goes out and subjugates and conquers the external planet around him and spreads out over the whole world. So we see this type of theme taking place between Genesis 1 and Genesis chapter 2. So as we continue on here, it says that God created man in his own image. In the image he created him, male and female created he them, and God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree seed which in its fruit you shall have them for food." So man can eat either one of those. But then we see that the animals only get the herbs. It says, "To every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps in the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given a green plant for food," okay, which is the herbs. And it was so. And so what we see here is that God is giving dominionship and rulership and authority to man over the whole planet. Now, this is another reason why evolution is false. Because if man came from monkeys, okay, that also means that when Jesus Christ came as a human being on earth, that him in his bodily form would have been descended from a monkey, which is a form of blasphemy. It's like saying God is an animal, because Jesus is God incarnate. But even more specific than that, Jesus in the Bible traces his lineage all the way back to Adam. And Adam was given kingship, rulership, and authority over the planet. And that kingship would be inherited as an heir to the throne by his son and their son, and then so on down the line. And so you can trace in the genealogy of Jesus in the Bible to see that the very kingship, the very authority to rule over the whole planet that was given to Adam, that there's an heir to the throne in each generation that falls directly eventually upon the shoulders of Jesus, that Jesus is the heir to being king of the planet, king of the world, the King of Kings, okay? And so if Adam is not the first man, and if Adam was not given this original authority, and if he doesn't have a specific heir in every generation that leads up to Jesus, then Jesus wouldn't be King of Kings or King of the world, because there would be no kingship by which he could be heir to. So there has to be an original Adam. This genealogy has to be correct in order for Jesus to be the King of Kings. And so that's another reason why evolution is false. And actually evolution is designed, in my opinion, to attack the very messianic nature of Jesus, in addition to attack the authority of God to rule on the planet. And so that's what we see in Genesis chapter 1, when it talks about the creation of man, that man has dominion to rule over the planet. And part of that dominion and part of that being made in the image of God also means that man is given free will and free choice. He has to be a reasoning, thinking creature because that's in the image of God. God is a reasoning, thinking God. And we see this, that God is someone you have a personal relationship with, that man is made in his personal image in the sense that God is a personal God. God is a person. He's actually three persons in one. And so that's what the Trinity is. And so the fact that man is made in that image is very apparent in the character of man and having those ability to make free will choices and have dominion and have a relationship, because that's how God is. Okay, so God gave man authority, and he also gave him free will when he created Adam and Eve in his image. So then we get to the last verse here, which says, "And God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good, and there was evening and there was morning the sixth day." Now, the important thing to note here is that when it says, "And God saw everything he had made," the word "made" here in Hebrew is asah. It means basically the things that he had physically caused to manifest. Okay, the darkness is not something he actually physically caused to manifest, because it's not something, it's the absence of something. So it's not like you make darkness any more than when you make a pot, you're making the hole that's in the middle of the pot. You're making the pot, and the hole is the absence of the thing that you made, not the actual thing you made itself. And so when it says that God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good, he's talking about the physical things that he made, the habitable part of the world, if you will. Those are the parts of the things that God made that were good. It doesn't mean that the darkness, the place of evil, where evil is hidden in the darkness, it doesn't mean that realm is good. And that essentially, in my opinion, is the place of non-existence, because the Bible says that God speaks to the things that are not as though they were. And so there are things that God never wanted to exist in our reality, such as evil. He didn't want evil and death to enter from non-existence into this world. And so those are the things that God does not want to exist. So he left it in a place, in a realm of darkness, of non-existence. And it was the sin of man that let those things into this world. And God has a plan to redeem this, to redeem man from that decision and to place evil back into the pit and eventually into the lake of fire for all eternity. So that's essentially what's going on here, is that God creates the entire world in 6 days, and everything that he makes is good, because he's a good God, and all of his creation is very good. And anything that's evil, God doesn't delight in evil, and it's in a state of darkness and non-existence. Evil is not in the planet in this point, in terms of existence, because all the things that God made were good. And so that's Genesis chapter 1. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please comment or like and subscribe. And please check out our Bible study videos as we go along here in our subsequent chapters. And we hope to see you in more videos. And also, again, check out our blog at grailoftruth.com. And I appreciate you watching the video. Okay, thanks very much.